All right, looking at the algebraic method to find an inverse. It says in 2 steps, but depending on the numbers, it's really more than that. But step 1, the general step 1, is to swap x and y in the equation. Swap x and y in your equation. So every x is going to become a y, every y is going to become an x. Similar right here, you can actually see it right here. Technically, what does f of x stand for? F of x is the y value. Okay, so we can see the 2x is going to become a 2y. And this f of x, which was a y, is going to become an x. So swapping your x and y. And then general step 2 is to resolve for y. Okay. So you can see that same equation right here. We had x equals 2y plus 3. So my first step to resolve y would be to subtract this 3 off of both sides. So you can see I subtracted off of both. I got x minus 3 on the left. I got 2y on the right. And then your last step to resolve for y would be to divide by 2 or multiply by a half, whichever you prefer. And that gives you x minus 3 over 2. And then at the very end, just notate it that this was the inverse. Remember we talked about that notation yesterday? Remember, you don't read that as f to the negative 1 of x, you just read it as f inverse of x. Or you could even say y inverse. Okay, I'm going to do the first one for you. F of x equals negative 3x plus 1. Remember, our general first step is to swap x and y. Okay, so technically this f of x is the y, and this x is over here. I'm going to actually write this as a y so that we can see that swapping happening. Okay, so my first step, when I swap the x and y, the y will become an x equals, and the negative 3x will become a negative 3y plus 1. And then we're going to start working on resolving for the y value. So first thing I want to do is cancel the plus 1 by subtracting 1. Subtract 1, subtract 1. That gives me x minus 1 on the left, which are not like terms, so you can't really combine them together. You just write x minus 1. And on the right-hand side, you'll have negative 3y. And then there's 2 different methods you can use to cancel the negative 3. You can divide by negative 3, or you can also multiply by the reciprocal, which would be negative 1/3. It doesn't matter. They both work the same mathematically. I'm going to do the times negative 1/3, times negative 1/3 on both sides, times negative 1/3. Although dividing by negative 3 is the same thing. So negative 3 times negative 1/3 cancel out because they become a positive 1. We're left with just our y, and on this side, you don't have to distribute that. I would just leave it exactly as it looks, negative 1/3 times x minus 1. And then I'm going to notate that this was my final answer inverse. I'm going to take that y equals and swap it out and put f inverse of x, since the original one was f of x. Ta-da, we did it. We found the equation for an inverse. Let's do the second one together. What's my first general step? It's on the top of your paper. We highlighted it in case you need to see it. Swap x and y, yes. So this y equals will become x equals. The x over 5 would become y over 5. Okay, and then we're going to start working on getting our y by itself. So first thing I would do would be what? Not yet on that one. We have to isolate the term with the y in it first. So we got to get this y over 5 by itself first. So first step would be subtract 3. We'll subtract 3 on the left. That gives us x minus 3 equals y over 5. Okay. Right now that says y divided by 5. What would be the reciprocal or the inverse, of dividing by 5? Multiply by 5. We're going to do that. We can multiply by 5 on both sides. Notice how when there's 2 terms on the left, I put it in parentheses when I multiply by 5 because I want to make sure that whole entire side gets multiplied by 5. 5s are going to cancel on the right because that would become 5y over 5, and 5y over 5 would be just y. On the left side, you don't have to distribute. If you want to distribute, you can. If I distributed, what would it become? 5x minus 15. Okay. And then for my final answer, since this is the inverse, I'm going to notate it with what looks like a negative 1, but it just means inverse. Pretty simple, right? Anyone know what the most common mistake is? We talked about it yesterday, but same thing on this one. Just making things negative. People will literally go through the equation and just change this sign, change this sign, change this sign, change this sign. But that's not an inverse. You don't just change the signs. All right, would y'all like to try the last one, doing an ink pair share? You do it and then share with a partner. All right, ink pair share. You're going to do it, then you're going to share with a partner. Ink pair share. The ips. Let's take 2 minutes and then we'll share. Look up at the top if you're already stuck on what your first step would be. And then be prepared to share your final inverse with a buddy old pal once our timer goes off. All right, 30 more seconds, and then be prepared to share your inverse answer with a partner. See a lot of people working ahead. That last one, a little tricky. And let's share. If you didn't pick a partner already, we'll do pinks with purples, yellows with greens, and some purples, yellows with greens. Just compare so you guys same thing. See if your partner labeled it as an inverse. Make sure they use that official notation.
What's the inverse? Oh, that's negative.
Yeah, it looks like to the negative one. Alright, our first step was to swap the x and y, which remember the f of x is just the y, so we'd put an x there. On the top we'd have 7y plus 18 over 2. What was your first step for isolating the y? What'd y'all do first? Multiply by 2 times 2. Ooh, wrong color. So that would become 2x equals 7y plus 18. And then what was your second step? Subtract 18, giving me 2x minus 18 equals 7y. And then your last step, you have a choice. You can either divide by 7 or you can multiply by 1/7. Pick your own adventure. I'm going to do divide on this one since I did times the fraction on the first one. When you look at the two fractions, so when you look at like 2x over 7, does that reduce at all? No. What about 18 over 7? No, so I'm just going to leave it exactly as it looks. And then for my final answer, just make sure you notate it with that official inverse. It started with f of x, so I'm going to use f inverse of x. Okay. A word problem. Yay, what should we do? Annotate. Hashtag, what are we trying to find? Let's read it. Claire's garden contains a what? Anyone know what a hosta plant is? Does it matter? Doesn't even matter. The plant has a height of 5 inches when she planted it. Okay, the function f of t equals 0.5t plus 5 models the height in inches of the plant t days after planting, where the time is in between 0 and 20. So between 0 days and 20 days after planting. Which of the following shows the correct value and interpretation of f inverse of 14. So this is kind of like two things that we're going to need to do. Hashtag, we're going to need to probably find the inverse. Hashtag find the inverse. And after we know the inverse, what are we also going to need to do? Figure out the value of 14. Find f inverse of 14. All right, I'm going to give you a few minutes to struggle through this one with your table and see if y'all can kind of work together to find the inverse and see if you can figure out what the value of f inverse of 14 would represent on this one. But again, as a gang, as a table, let's start by just finding the inverse of this function, and then we can talk about what this value would be. All right, 2 minutes. Let's see if we can struggle through it. This one's a little tricky for sure. It's easy to find the inverse, it's easy to find the value, but it takes a little bit of thinking about what it would represent in that word problem. Oh, it lit the sign. Okay, good. You can lower it, just lay down the wall. All right, at the end of the 20 seconds, guys, I am going to have you share an answer on your fingers, whether you think it was A, B, C, or D. 1, 2, 3, or 4 fingers. We'll see who was able to figure it out. I see a lot of quiet tables that did not talk to each other at all, but if you did, good job. All right, let's see some fingers. What do we think it was? A, B, C, or D? 1, 2, 3, or 4 fingers. All right, some conflicting. We got some with 2. I see some 2s, some 3s, and some 4s, but at least no 1s. That's good. Okay. The correct answer was 4 fingers. D. Let's look at Y. Okay. When you did the actual inverse, what was your inverse equation? Oh, I guess that's not an X, it's a T. Excuse me. Anyone get the actual inverse equation? Yes, it was 2, technically T minus 10, but X is fine. Okay. And then, did you plug in 14? Yes. Okay, then we plugged in 14. Would be 2 times 14 minus 10. So F inverse of 14 is, what would that be? 28 minus 10, which was 18. So you definitely should have at least narrowed it down to either C or D, because C or D are the only two that say that it was equal to 18. Okay, so definitely not A, not B. Guys, can y'all bring it down just a little, just a little. All right, now to figure out which one it represents, one of them says it represents it'll take 14 days for the plant to grow 18 inches, and the other says it'll take 18 days for the plant to grow 14 inches. So, our original input was number of days, time, aka number of days. And then our original output was how tall the plant is, height of the plant. When you do an inverse, these swap. Okay? The values of them swap, the meanings of them swap. So our new on the inverse Okay, so these will swap on the inverse. So that means our new input should represent height, and our new output should represent time of days. So on the inverse, the t input represents height, which makes no sense that t would be height, and our new output, which would be f of t, would represent time. So this means what you're actually plugging in, this t right here, is actually the height. You're plugging in height, and you got 18 for the days. Height and days. So finding that answer, it'll take 18 days for the plant to have a height of 14 inches. So the meanings of them switch too. It's not just that they switch places, they actually switch like what they refer to. All right, backside, let's look at a few that are not linear. All the ones we did on the front were inverses of linear and linear and linear. All of those were linear. And the inverse was also a linear function. On the backside, we got some cube roots, some cubes. Anyone know what's going to cancel a cube root? A cube. And then what would cancel a cube? A cube root. Yes, they're inverses of each other. Our steps are still the same. Okay, my step 1 on this one will be to swap my x and y. So we'll have x equals, and then we'll have cube root of y minus 3. Okay, so first step, swap your x and y. Second step, work on re-isolating that y. My first thing I would do would be to add 3. And we get x plus 3 equals cube root of y. And then, as these guys said, to cancel a cube root, we need to cube. So, aka bring it to the third power, which means we're going to do the same thing on the left. Whole thing to the third power. All that happens on the right is they cancel out and leave you with just a y. On the left, you think I'm going to make you FOIL that? No, surprising. I know. I usually make you do the hard work, but no, we're going to leave it just like it is. And then just notate that final answer as an inverse. Okay, second one's kind of the same, but opposite. It has a cube in the answer, so we're going to eventually need a cube root somewhere. What's going to be my first step, though? Not yet. Swap your x and y, right. And f of x technically is your y, so in place of this y, we'll put in x equals. In place of 2x to the third, we're going to write 2y to the third plus 4. Now we can work on getting that y by itself. What's step 1 for getting y by itself? Subtract. Okay, that'll leave me with x minus 4 on the left, and then 2y to the third on the right. Can we do the cube root next?
No.
Not yet. What do we still need to cancel? The 2. Remember, you have 2 ways to do that. You can either divide by 2 or multiply by a half. Pick your favorite. Which one y'all want to do? The reason I keep naming both is I've seen AP questions where it shows it multiplying, and sometimes people get confused, like, why are they multiplying by that? This is the same thing. Okay, so now we have x minus 4 over 2 equals y to the third. And then one last step to isolate that y. Cube root, right. Which looks like a square root, but it has a little 3 up here called an index. So we'll do that same thing on the left. Am I going to make you do any kind of simplifying on the left? No, you can leave it just like that. You're welcome. I actually don't know if you could do any simplifying, but
Make it x over 2 minus 2.
oh yeah, you could do that. Yeah. Okay. And then final answer, what are we going to do? Notate that this was an inverse. Put a net to the negative 1, or f inverse of x. Getting the hang of it? Alright, I'm going to have you do an ink pair share on the third one, aka you do it, and then we'll pair up and share up. Ink, pair, share. Let's take a couple minutes. I think we can do it in a minute and a half. The last one we had plenty of time when we did 2 minutes, so let's see where a minute and a half will get us.
What is I? Where is it? I'm actually you just made up a number.
Because it's the inverse, so you have to inverse it.
I don't know what the keyboard is.
Oh, we're talking about the previous
I'm
one.
not writing I.
Yeah. Choose B. I'll choose C at first.
Well, it starts off like this. X equals 0 minus y. Subtract x minus 5. And then multiply by 2. You get 2x.
Okay. Let's share the answer we got with our group. I'm going to change it up. Let's have pink share with yellows, purple share with greens. Just so y'all got the same answer. Pinks and yellows, purple and greens. Share your answers.
Yeah, I put this because I don't know what I.
Alright, I saw a few different answers walking around, but mostly right, just different kind of formats that are equivalent. Again, our first step still is to swap the x and y. Then we'll start working on isolating that y, so I'm going to add 1, add 1. And then here I did see a few people use my option of, instead of dividing by 2, you can multiply by -1/2. It's the same thing. What did most of y'all do? Did y'all divide or multiply? Everybody loves the division. Okay, and then right here, what cancels the to the third power? Cube roots, which looks like a square root with a little 3. And that should be our final little inverse, y inverse, cube root of x plus 1 over -2. -2. You're also welcome if you want to move that negative to the top and write -x minus 1 and put it over 2. That's more proper form. Usually it's not proper form to leave the negative on the bottom. But I'm just going to say that's fine. All right, couple of practice AP questions. Oh my god, it's a word problem. What do we get to do? Annotate. Okay, a student wants to verify that the functions f of x equals x to the third plus 2 and g of x equals the cube root of x minus 2 are inverses. Which of the following methods is sufficient to prove that the two functions are inverses? This one kind of tricked me when I first worked it because I thought that the answer was not sufficient to prove, but apparently it is according to AP Classroom. Read through the answers. Put your final answer on a whiteboard. Let's see if we can figure it out. Everybody grab your whiteboard. I'll give you a minute, just a minute and a half, so you can actually read through the answers. Oh, I forgot I changed the answers. I changed them, so now they are sufficient to prove. Okay. I forgot that I went through and changed it because I didn't agree with AP Classroom's answer. Brandon, we learned it yesterday, bro. You didn't miss this part. We learned this yesterday. Oh. Make sure you read through all the answers.
No question.
We learned it yesterday. Alright, everybody got a letter on a whiteboard? Anyone still writing? Alright, we'll stop our timer. Board's up. Oh, cute. decorated letters. The correct answer is D. The only way to prove, that was the key word, prove the two functions are inverses is by doing the compositions. We did this yesterday. Composing is the verb instead of the noun. English. Composing the two functions and showing that f of g of x is x and g of f of x is x. College Board only had this, and I was like, but don't you have to check both of them? But honestly, if you check one, the other one's going to work also. I promise you, if you get x for one, the other one will also be x. Okay. Okay, another AP Classroom question on the bottom. The function f is defined by f of x equals negative 3x plus 15. If f inverse is the inverse of function f, which is honestly what they show in the tables. All of these tables are inverses. Which of the following tables correctly shows some values of x and the corresponding values for f inverse of x? There's a few different ways you could do this question. Feel free to table talk and try and tackle it together. See if you can figure out what to do. We're not on it yet, Brasif. Come, stop yelling at me. Let's take a couple minutes so we can figure it out. Talk too loud. That was the... Again, there's different ways you can do it. Talk in your group. How should we attack this? We should start by doing this. Or we can do this harder way. Or... If you're stuck, ask someone in your group, hey, what are you trying? I want to try that too.
26. E. 25.
I see a lot of people choosing the easier way. Great job, geniuses. There's an easy way and there's a hard way.
Oh, yeah, same thing. Yeah, right. I'll use the same thing.
One deviation of the correct answers. Bert, are you going to mark it? Are you stuck? Or you just don't want to do it? Understandable. I'll put this question on a test, and you'll want to do it.
Yeah.
You're going to be like, dang, I should have paid attention. I should have actually tried.
What's the answer? He told you that.
No, I didn't. When did I ever say?
Alright, stop lying.
I didn't even say.
You're going to prove anything except for maybe juniors have their, like, cafeteria presentation. But they haven't given us any other dumb activities. Emphasis on dumb. Yeah, sorry, junior. Sophomore had a meeting during Advil yesterday. Freshman had the day before, so I think juniors is today. Not for algebra 2. Or at least, we've never done it. I'd be surprised if they made us do it. Okay, give me a show of fingers. One finger if you thought it was A, two if you thought it was B, three if you thought it was C, four if you thought it was D. Barry. Bert, how many fingers you got up? It was 3 fingers. It was C. Okay. The easy way to do it is to start by just finding the inverse of this function. When you find the inverse of this function, you end up with, I got negative 1/3 x plus 5. And then once you have the inverse of the function, then you can just find some points that are in the tables that match this. So I looked at this and said, well, if I plug in 9, what am I going to get? Negative 1/3 times 9 plus 5. That would be negative 3 plus 5, which is 2. 9, 2. That one works. And then I checked this one also. If I plug in 3, negative 1/3 times 3 plus 5. That's twice. That would become negative 1 plus 5, which is 4. So it does work for both of those points. The harder way to do this question, I saw a lot of people, or not this year, but in previous years, I've seen people like try and like write the equation from the points and then check if that equation is the inverse of the first equation. That's a harder way to do it. Okay,